You're listening to the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast, a place for sex addicts to share their experiences of recovery, to help break the stigma, myths, and misconceptions of sex addiction. This podcast may contain topics of sexuality, sexual trauma, dysfunction, or other things that may be triggering, so listener discretion is advised. Hello, and welcome to the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast. My name is Jason, I'm a sex addict, and I will be your podcast host for today. Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome to episode 163 of the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast. So we're finally back to sharing recordings from the SAA and COSA Speaker meeting. This week and next week will feature recordings from the May 4th meeting. This week will feature Judith M from COSA. During her share, Judith mentioned the Unity Prayer, and sometime last year there was a bit of controversy about the Unity Prayer. A few members of COSA researching the Unity Prayer found that it was actually a copyrighted prayer from Overeaters Anonymous Incorporated called I Put My Hand in Yours, and this was written by Roxanne S. It was copyrighted in 1968. And so wherever we are using this prayer, we're making sure that we credit Overeaters Anonymous and Roxanne S. And on the Bay Area website, we have put reprinted by permission of Overeaters Anonymous Incorporated. And so for the reading this week, I did want to do the Unity Prayer, or I Put My Hand in Yours. I put my hand in yours, and together we can do what we could never do alone. No longer is there a sense of hopelessness. No longer must we each depend upon our own unsteady willpower. We are all together now, reaching out our hands for a power and strength greater than ours. And as we join hands, we find love and understanding beyond our wildest dreams. So I thought reading that here at the beginning would give a little bit of context to when Judith mentions that in her share. I've been meaning to post this as a question to the podcast audience if they enjoy hearing readings at the beginning of the episodes. I usually try to find a reading that corresponds to something in the recording, but a few people that are new to the podcast have noticed that the intros take a little bit of time before getting to the actual recording. So I wanted to know if anyone thought this was a useful thing or if it's something that I should refrain from and just get right into the recording. So if you have any thoughts on that, you can send me an email at jason@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com, and I'd be happy to take that in. One more thing I wanted to mention before moving to the recording is now that we're upwards of 160 episodes, it is getting harder and harder to find specific types of episodes. So with the help of a few friends, we've been putting together a list of various different types of episodes. And I do have these lists that I share at Zoom meetings, but I wanted to have a place for those to be more public. One of the places that I'm going to be doing that on is the new podcast website, sexaddictsrecoverypod.com, which we are actually moving forward on. But I've also made a few playlists on YouTube to help narrow the search. I've made a playlist for all the Joe and Charlie episodes, all of our First Step episodes, and corresponding to this episode, the SAA and COSA Speaker meeting episodes. And so that playlist includes both the SAA speaker and the COSA speaker. I also threw in a few other COSA specific episodes that were not part of the SAA and COSA speaker meeting. And I will be leaving a link to that playlist in the show notes. Getting back to this episode and thinking about the playlist, one of our previous speakers, Linda P., who was on episode 93, does the introduction for Judith on this episode. And so without further ado, here is Linda introducing Judith M. at the May 4th SAA and COSA speaker meeting. I hope you enjoy it.
Hi, I'm Linda, grateful recovering COSA. So I was pretty honored when Judith asked me to introduce her. I've known Judith for a long time. I don't know, it's less than 20 years, but more than 15. So when I was relatively new, maybe a couple of years into COSA, Judith started coming to my home meeting quite regularly. And we've gotten to know each other well over the years, attending retreats together, and we've been in a feedback group together for, I think it's almost 5 years now. So I just have a huge amount of admiration for Judith's recovery. The only problem when we talk on the phone is we have trouble ending the conversation because it's so interesting for both of us, and we learn so much from each other. And I am very excited to hear Judith share. I feel like we've had parallel recoveries in some ways and not in other ways. And I always get a huge amount out of it when I hear Judith share. And so without further ado, here's Judith.
Thank you, Linda. Oh, perfect, Cindy. Thank you. She just reset the timer. So let's see. My name is Judith. I'm a codependent. My partner is a sex addict. I am a people pleaser. I'm a semi-retired academic, a sometime poet, a mother, a grandmother, and since 2007, a person in recovery. Thank you for letting me do this service this evening. The thing is, when I first said yes to this, I had this desire I really wanted to craft something, make it super useful for every single person that was attending. And I just wanted to help everybody. And fortunately, I took a beat and I realized, okay, codependent much? So anyway, I realized that you're adults in recovery and you can take what you want and you can leave the rest. And my part is to share my experience, strength, and hope in a way that feels useful. So that's what I'm going to do. I actually thought about doing things like going through some of our readings and talk about, like the first time I heard the promises, and I was thinking, okay, fine, what am I doing here? And then the first time I heard the unity prayer, oh, I guess we're not supposed to call it that anymore, but, beyond your wildest dreams, I'm like, okay, whatever. But I'm not going to do that. Today, I'm going to share sort of a mini first step, so you kind of have a sense of who I am. A poem I wrote really early in recovery. It was just a few months. I was pretty raw. I didn't really even know what I was doing there. I had a sense, but yeah. And then at the very end, I'm going to share a poem I wrote just a few months ago. I'm also going to share a couple quotes that were super helpful for me in my recovery. I'm going to share my favorite tools. And if there's enough time at the end, I might talk about one of the tools, but I don't know if there'll be enough time. So this poem I'm going to read is a poem I wrote in 2008. It really helped me balance the story I had believed was true before recovery versus the truth of what my story was and being in recovery. So I wrote this in 2008, just a few months after I had started recovery. Recovery is the greatest. Recovery is nasty work. We move forward day by day. We rise in the morning and we try to continue to be in recovery. Craving can threaten our recovery. Sometimes we truly yearn for the past when the life we lived was a story. The life we had then was no more than a story. There was no truth. The story was ear-splitting. It made magical, time-consuming promises. The story was secretly controlling. The story was incredibly beautiful. The story was pleasing and dangerous. The story was profoundly rewarding. The story was exciting, fun, special, and powerful. We were the fortunate ones. We were greater than others. We were clever, extraordinary, and superhuman. The story had the power to make us say and do anything to anyone. Nothing was our fault. We acted as we were compelled to. We violated all sacred trusts to care for that story, to protect that story. We were required to suffocate our spirituality. We turned away from the holy. The truth is pain. The truth is presence. The truth breathes life into our soul. The truth is real and it's hard. It's healing and quiet. The truth is the silent cure. The only way to restore our spirit is to have recovery. We will live to share our tale. We will work every day against the story for serenity, courage, and wisdom. The promise of recovery is true. We trust that we have all the time we need for recovery. So my story, I think now that I have been a codependent for at least since I was a child, for sure, and I've definitely been a partner to a sex addict since 1978. In the AA 12 and 12, the authors wish us to have a dramatic bottom. Quote, only through utter defeat are we able to take our first steps toward liberation and strength. Our admission of personal powerlessness finally turns out to be a firm bedrock upon which a happy and purposeful life may be built. I finished my first step in COSA in 2010. It took me a few years to experience and to understand my story, disclosure of my partner, my family of origin, and how it affected me and how it continues to affect me, that my life was unmanageable, and that I was powerless. A quote that helped me believe I need to investigate the truth that my child of origin issues had deeply affected me was, quote, denial is a powerful tool, something we used in our childhood that was useful to us as a child, but because it helped us feel safe. But as adults, it puts us in danger. This quote was one of the guides my higher power used to help me see the answer to a question that plagued me in the very beginning of recovery. That question was, what made me such a perfect partner for someone with a secret life? I worked on trying to understand how I lived with a person with a secret life for 28 years before disclosure. I had absolutely no awareness of his addiction. It might be surprising to anybody hearing my story, but it's true. I had absolutely no idea there was any acting out, any secret life, any abuse to myself, my children, or my partner by my partner. And you note that I'm including my partner as one of the people who was abused because of this situation. That was something that took me a long time to understand. The question led me to accepting that I was a codependent, that my family of origin had set me up to have a partner that was a sex addict with a secret life. The most important part of my family of origin is that there was no drama. There's no abusive events, similar to what I heard in first steps of other COSAs. In fact, it was kind of boring. Now, after years of being a COSA, I've come to realize that the harm was the atmosphere of emotional neglect and the adult role I was forced to assume as a 9-year-old child. I think that this occurred for two reasons. One, I was the only girl in an Italian-American family. My experience of the social structure of Italian families is girls do all the household work, boys do outside work, and if they desire, they can cook. They don't clean up the dishes or anything, but they can be really good cooks. When I was 9 years old, my mother went to bed. She was 49. My mother's transition from homemaker to invalid transitioned me from the role of the youngest child with much older brothers to a homemaker taking care of an invalid. My mother's illness was never really named. Terms like manic depressive and schizophrenia were used. As far as I know, the term bipolar did not exist in the 60s. She remained in bed 45 weeks out of each year until she was 83, when she simply, very serenely, dropped dead. My father, I now know, was a Gold medal codependent. My father would say to me in the morning, "Your mother is not feeling well today. Can you help out a little?" Never once did I say, "What else is new?" Of course she's in bed today. She's been in bed there for the past several years. Why would today be any different? Or, of course, I will continue cooking, cleaning, running the house. We kept that a secret from each other. We never spoke of it. Denial was my family custom, and having wants and needs just did not ever feel like a very reasonable thing to have. By the time I was in high school, my job, when my mother was in her stay in bed phase, was to force her to eat, force her to get up and go to the bathroom, force her into a clean nightgown when necessary. I changed her bed, I kept her clean until I left home at 17, and even then, I cared for her on a regular basis, although it was never agreed on or discussed between my father and I. You would think that someone who was so parentified and had such a lack of parenting would have cut loose as a teenager. But I just became very, very careful. I knew that I was the only one who could take care of me, and being vulnerable in any way held little appeal. Experimenting with sex, drugs, did not feel like a good way to keep myself safe. My older brothers explained the details of sex to me in a very safe way. I was incredulous at first. "Are you sure you're not making this up?" They made it clear that they were not making it up. I met my partner in 1978 when I was 23. Before that, I dated, I had sex. The thing is, I was so locked into the idea that sex was for you and your partner, I got confused. In several cases, I should have realized I made a mistake and just chalked it up to a one-night stand. I'm not saying I advocate one-night stands, but they are certainly preferable to not admitting to myself that I made a mistake and I don't want to repeat it. Preferable to convincing myself that, of course, since I ended up in bed with this person, I must be in love with him, and then I should proceed to have a relationship with someone who's actually not good for me. This led to me stuffing my needs. I developed my codependency by manipulating other people into situations where I could control them with conversation. So they would come up with a plan I like, but I don't actually suggest the plan. I just get to agree with them. I was drawn to people who allowed me to behave in this codependent way. By the age of 23, I'd had 2 monogamous, longish-term relationships, one of which ended so unskillfully that my partner did not realize I was breaking up with him for almost a year. I wanted it to be his idea. I also dated a man who I found out 4 months into the relationship was married. I immediately stopped it. But several times after I cut it off, I accidentally had sex with him because I just couldn't think of a polite way of saying no. It is interesting for me to look at my early sexual activity and to reconcile my carefulness in selecting partners with my codependency. In comparison to many of my peers at the time, so we're talking like late 60s, 70s, I was picky and barely sexually active by their standards. In retrospect, I seem to be good at not having sex with a partner too soon. Even my should-have-been one-night stands happened after an acquaintance of some time. Seeing the situation now as a person in COSA recovery, I realized that after I had sex once, that was it. I was hooked. I had a compulsion to participate in a codependent sexual relationship. At 23, I was taking my time in college because I was working 30 hours a week as a computer programmer. I decided before I graduated, I should have a sexual relationship that was sure to have absolutely no future. I thought it would be good for me to have sex with someone so ill-suited to me that it would just be sex. I would get over the idea that everyone I had sex with would be a potential husband. The person I chose is my current partner. I met him in August 1978. For 1 week, I considered him as a candidate as my no future sexual partner. After we were intimate for the first time, he told me he wanted me to be the mother of his children, quickly got up, got dressed, said goodbye, drove home, vowing never to go out with him again. By September of 1978, I had met and fallen totally in love with his mother, which you can imagine, my mother was a vegetable, his mother was awesome. In August 1980, we decided to marry. The week before the wedding, 2 elderly women relatives of his took me aside at 2 different times and tried to warn me out of marrying into this family of men that, quote, act fine before you're married, but after, act very different. I don't think either woman was aware that the other one was warning me. And they were never very specific about what acting differently meant. Can anybody say family disease? I married him in December 1980. I finished college. I had a child. I went to graduate school. I had another child. As I built my family and settled into my career, I became a person who detached from negative situations, who could not feel my feelings and always thought that everything was fine. For example, when my second child was 18 months, she was diagnosed with a heart ailment. She was hooked up to a tiny little monitor. I had to do round-the-clock checks every 30 minutes and record the time in a diary and describe what she was doing. My partner was teaching in another state that quarter. When he asked if he should come home for a second, I was hurt. I thought he had to ask. Why was he asking? Then I stuffed that feeling. I very quietly said, "Oh no, we're fine. I got it handled. You just keep doing your work." I could not ask for help. I could not express or even acknowledge my anger that he was not already running for the next plane home. I could not express any wants or needs. I mostly just took a lot of extra showers so I could cry without bothering my older child. For the following 13 years, there was more and more moments of confusion and anger, only to be stuffed immediately and reverting to the belief that everything was fine. In 2006, these moments came closer and closer together. My health started to suffer, rashes all over my body, especially in my mouth, attacks of tachycardia. My doctor kept asking about stress. We see these symptoms in soldiers with PTSD. I kept saying I had a perfect life. To this day, I'm very suspicious of people I meet that tell me they have a perfect life. Finally, in February 2007, there was a life-altering disclosure. Between that day and my first 12-step meeting was a period of about 5 weeks. These 5 weeks are hard to recall. When I try to, it feels like bringing a story back to mind that I just can't remember the details of. I know the facts, of course. 75% of my hair fell out. Aftermath of days of being in shock. Evidently, the body does not consider hair a vital organ, so it just lets it fall out. Days of vomiting, crying, despair, and an accidental disclosure to our children. I called 3 people to reach out. When I began the conversation with "something's gone wrong in my marriage," each of them interrupted me and said, "Did you do something you shouldn't have?" It was inconceivable to them that my perfect partner could have been anything less than perfect. My 20-year-old daughter moved back into our home because she didn't trust us with her sister. My 14-year-old daughter slept with me and cried in her sleep. My partner began to go to meetings almost immediately for his own recovery. He asked me to go to 12 Steps Couples program. He moved downstairs in the guest room. He refused to move out. Of course, we live in California. Who can afford 2 households? Not us. I was tested for STDs, and instead of STDs, the doctor found a tiny tumor in my cervix. It was very early detection. I was able to deal with it very easily. In 12 Steps, I gradually discovered that I wanted to keep breathing. It was startling to accept the idea that it wasn't that I needed to not exist anymore. It was that I did not know how to live with this new awareness. I slowly came to understand that I needed to learn how to live a new life. This life had to include accepting that I had to be totally honest with myself in regard to what was happening in my present. Accepting that I had to debunk the story that I had created in the past. COSA helped me face some very painful truths about myself. I often can't tell when I'm being mistreated. I blamed myself for almost everything, and I felt I had to fix it. I struggled to ask for anything just for me, or even know what I needed. Praise made me uncomfortable, and I rarely trusted it. I agreed to do things I didn't want to do and accepted what I never should have accepted. I explained painful situations by creating a fantasy story, twisting the facts just enough to make them feel like everything was okay. I let my children and myself stay in a toxic environment that harmed all of us. My body was breaking down from the stress. My partner had withdrawn from our family, and I told myself it was fine. I began to reject my own intuition. The truth was, my life was unmanageable, and I was powerless. As I worked the steps, all through the steps, my higher power opened me up to deeper questions. What truths, feelings, or realities was I avoiding? How am I coming to understand my family of origin? What would it mean for me to truly admit that I was powerless? Are there relationships that I feel driven to control? What do I resent, and what lies beneath that resentment? Do I let the happiness or unhappiness of others control me? Since working my first step one, what moments have shaken me as deeply as the initial disclosure? Which of those moments triggered me and pushed me into further recovery? And which ones did I handle with steadiness, using the tools I've gathered, and which tools helped me the most? So my most useful work tools of recovery, number one is working the steps with a sponsor, listening to my sponsor, trusting the program, meetings and program calls, lots and lots of program calls, connecting with COSAs, speaking to COSAs, listening to COSAs, making and updating my circles, especially around triggers. I even made posters for my study and my bathroom, and I hung them up so I could see them every day. Journaling and writing my poetry, applying the 12 steps to specific problems. That's one of my favorites. Learning about codependency and people pleasing through talks with COSAs and my sponsor. Doing service. Service is important. I've done workshops on codependency and people pleasing, understanding triggers, journaling and poetry, applying the steps, circles and sobriety. And most of that stuff is in the new COSA book. You can find it if you look at the table of contents. Okay, so a few weeks ago, I finished my 8th and 9th step the second time around. And as an amends to myself, I wrote this poem. A blessing for release and renewal. There are those whose presence was meant to shape my history, not my destiny. Yes, I have clung to their shadows, searching for meaning in the marks they left, as if their darkness could teach me how to shine. Women like me were taught to look inward, to shift through the chambers of our souls for blame that was never ours to carry, to bear the weight of trespasses that never belonged on our shoulders. We all live with the ghosts of what was, their whispers threading through the fabric of now. May I learn that these echoes do not have to shape my present or follow me into the years yet to unfold. Let their voices fade into the distance, dimmed by the radiant light of forgiveness and recovery. May I honor loyalty where it is returned and let love flow, not as a sacrifice, but as shared grace, balanced and true. For love is not meant to tether me to those who never chose to stay. May I know that loud is not always strong and quiet is not always weak. For the fiercest storms often arrive in silence, and the gentlest breeze can tear down walls. May I free myself from the grip of fear and regret. Forgiving the mistakes that once defined me, may they fall away like autumn leaves, revealing the bare branches of my truth, ready to bloom in the soft warmth of spring's return. In this moment, may I step forward untethered and renewed as a soul lit with quiet strength of a life lived in recovery and reclaimed. So we have 6 minutes. What I'd like to do is share my sort of favorite tools list. Okay, so these are kind of my favorite tools. Working the steps with a sponsor and listening to them. Basically, to me, that's like trusting the program. Just trust it and go on. Meetings and programs calls. Lots of them. Lots of program calls. You know, now with Zoom, you can go to as many meetings as you need, but connecting with COSAs, super important. Making and updating my circles. I've even made circles around specific triggering events. And these posters I made, they're big. Journaling and writing poetry, lots of that. And the thing that's great about that is it's just for you and your higher power. You can write anything you want. It doesn't have to make sense. It can be stream of consciousness. Nobody's going to check it for spelling or say anything about your handwriting or that you had run-on sentences or any voices you hear from when you were learning to write as a child. You do not have to listen to them. You just vomit onto the page. Obviously, I think that's important. Applying the 12-step to specific problems. I love that, and there's definitely a thing in the COSA book about it. I've given many workshops about it as a COSA and as a member of a couple that's in a 12-step recovery program. It's super crazy and magical how it works. It's kind of weird. Doing service. Service is like what I'm doing right now, speaking. I've done shares about codependency and people-pleasing, understanding triggers, journaling and poetry, applying the steps. Oh, I have a note here that it's in the new book on page 304. Circles and sobriety. Those are my absolute favorite tools. If you want to hold your phone up and take a picture of it or something, you can do that. I'm also, let me see if I'm doing this. In my name, I have my email. So frequently what I offer is if somebody wants to ask me a question about the tools I like or the way I do my poetry or my journaling or just anything, feel free to email me. Just identify that you were in this particular event so I can remember what I talked about. And, yeah, I definitely want to put that out there for people. So, wow, this is so cool. I'm done on time. So anyway, thank you for letting me do this service. You helped me by allowing me to share my experience, strength, and hope. Amen.
Many, many thanks to Judith for this share. I really, really enjoyed it. I've been going through a lot recently, and hearing her share was really motivating. I really loved the poetry writings that she had to offer, both at the beginning and end of her share. And it was reminding me, a friend of mine in the program, Luke, has been putting together a bunch of his writings over the past year. Some of them are prayers, and others are poetic meditations. He's been sending out a lot of these via text and finally has a compilation of all of them. And I've been going through a lot and trying to figure out which one I wanted to read here. So Judith's poetry really reminded me of some of Luke's writings. And so I did want to read something that he wrote on May 1st of this year. And it says, "Here's a simple thought that has worked as an effective digestive when I feel torn, when I want to do the next right thing, but something in me resists, and the words and actions of willingness feel like knots in my muscles, lumps in my throat, and like I've swallowed the whole world down the wrong pipe. This settles me. I'd rather face the reality of powerlessness than stay trapped in the compulsive behaviors and defects I use to convince myself and others that my self-sufficiency is absolute. The loudest fight is always with the world, but that's just the distraction. The real conflict is my disease trying to suppress the part of me that's willing, the part that wants to do something different. Yes, a part of me is always willing, even when I don't feel willing. If I'm frustrated that I'm not willing, if I want to change that or I'm open to learning how, then some part of me already is. That quiet piece of me, that part that wants a new way, isn't gone. It's just buried beneath fear, resistance, and habit, but it's still there. In my newfound freedom from self-sufficiency, which was really just a frantic attempt to prove that my control and power were never as far-reaching as I had claimed. They didn't extend beyond my next dopamine hit, which had become the center of my thinking and living. I see how desperate I was to appear confident, capable, and untouched. But all it did was isolate me further and tighten the grip of my defects. And here's what surprises me. When I let go, when I stop trying to prop up that illusion, the terrible consequences I feared don't come rushing in. What actually happens is the opposite. Life quiets. The moment passes. The world becomes more manageable. I don't fall apart. I stumble forward, imperfectly, on a path of progress. Sometimes gracefully, sometimes clumsily, sometimes getting black and blue, but always further from my bottom, always closer to the spiritual solution, always onwards with compassion. Let thy will, not my addicts, be done. Grant me restraint of pen and tongue. Guide my thoughts, actions, and words. Amen, amen, amen. Yeah, beautiful, beautiful writing. And there were so many different ones to choose. And this one really, really spoke to me. He ends a lot of the meditations with that prayer. And it's been really fun seeing the development of his writing over the past year. But yeah, super grateful for Luke and all he does. And I'm really glad he let me read one of these here on the podcast. So reading through this, I've been resistant to a lot of change recently. I have been in a lot of avoidance in all aspects of my life, not just my relationship with my wife. Looking at things in my health, I've been wanting to make a change for a long time. I've had a hip problem for a few years, and I finally got it looked at this past week. It was something that I knew needed to happen, but I've been avoiding it. As I age, and I just had a birthday last weekend. Wonderful, wonderful weekend, but still, as I age, those fears come up, and I like to avoid instead of move forward and try to make the changes that are necessary. So the inevitable hip replacement could be in my future, and my dad's going through the same thing right now. Very interesting. Working on the podcast, I've been in a bit of avoidance. Trying to get behind the microphone has been difficult over the past week. Scheduling new recordings. Life has been really busy, so it's been difficult, but I still am moving forward with that. I do have some fears after not recording for a while and need to work through that. But yeah, one of the things that did come up, like I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, is with our inner group, we had our visioning meeting this past week, and there are some really cool projects coming forward. One of them is moving forward with the sexaddictsrecoverypod.com website. I do have a few people that are involved with WordPress that are going to be helping making that transition from the splash page that we currently have to an active website. So I've got a basic skeleton of a website that I'm looking at right now and looking over the next few weeks of what kind of tweaks we can make before making the website live. But really excited for that. And that's where I hope to have a database of all of our episodes, also different lists of specific kinds of episodes, first steps, Joe and Charlie, traditions, SAA COSA speaker meetings, music and recovery episodes, things like that, that'll make it a little bit easier to find specific types of episodes. I also plan on having a list of resources, whether it be the books that we name or the music that has been played on each of the episodes. I'd been planning on adding some music to this episode, but because I've been delayed in recording for about a week, I want to get this episode edited and posted as quickly as possible. We haven't gotten any comments recently on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube. We may have gotten an email here or there, but I'm going to be saving those for another episode. So if you did have any feedback for the podcast, any comments on particular episodes, or if you have any thoughts on what I talked about at the beginning, whether or not to include a reading at the beginning of each episode, you can reach us at feedback@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com. There you can also add any music that has been part of your recovery that you would like to share with the podcast community. If you want to be a guest on the podcast or have any questions, you can reach me at jason@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com, and I'd be happy to get back to you. The next episode will be Brandon P. speaking on behalf of SAA at the May 4th SAA COSA speaker meeting. and hopefully I'll have a quicker turnaround on that one. And I've mentioned before that we do have another first step that has been recorded, as well as a 12-step story and a few conversations that are in the schedule. So look forward to those episodes coming up. And with that, I'm going to close out this episode. I thank you so much for tuning into this one. And as always, keep coming back. The views and opinions contained in the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the Bay Area Intergroup or the ISO of SAA.